Howdy everyone. Last time we talked about hand saws and how to set them up, find a good saw, um, get it ready to work. Today I thought we would maybe look at hand planes because we've got saws that we can cross cut wood to length and rip it to width. Well, now we need to know how to plane it so that we can use it for our purposes. It can be a little bit daunting if you're new to hand tools, just knowing what to get. Every magazine and book you pick up has lots of recommendations, and some of them are quite expensive. One of the reasons we wanted to do these tutorials was to really just kind of cut through the garbage and show you what I have found is necessary and what I have found is really not. You really have two major genres or camps with traditional hand planes. You have the all wooden bodied planes, you have the metal bodied planes. There's also transitional planes that are in the middle, but these are the major two camps. You really only need three simple planes to dimension any wood. I don't care if it's pine, bubinga, or bird's eye maple. Anything in the world can be dimensioned with only three planes. And that goes for furniture work, housework, timber framing, and everything. You need a triplane, a jack plane, and a smoothing plane. Your triplane is going to be your longest plane. It's got the widest iron. It typically will go anywhere from 18 to 24 inches. Your jack plane is going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 15 inches, 16, somewhere around in there. And your smoothers are pretty small. This is a toted coffin smoother. They're pretty small. That's the only three planes you need. What to look for is something vintage. There are some new planes made. A lot of them are crap, unfortunately. Some of them that are not are extremely, extremely expensive, and I would put any good vintage plane up against the best modern-made planes. $5 all day long at yard sales. You can't beat that, really. What to look for, though, is does the plane have all its parts and the condition? Also, look at the blade. Make sure you have a cap iron with the blade, a double iron plane. This is very important. We'll get into that later on why. This is an example of a wooden plane that a friend of mine brought me. You might think, oh, that's all cracked. It's all dried out. It's got a rusty blade. That's not good for anything. Well, hopefully the seller thinks that too, because you can get this cheap. You can clean this up and restore it. All of these wooden planes that are all shiny and pretty look just like this not long ago when they were restored. And this plane will last your entire lifetime. We did a video recently about restoring a wooden plane, and it shows the basics. I mean, you get these, and the iron's normally all rusted out. You soak that in vinegar for a few days. The rust comes off. You sharpen it up. A few things just to know. The wooden planes, once you get familiar and practice, are going to outperform a metal plane any day of the week. Wood on wood is just so little friction. Metal on wood, no matter how much you polish the sole, is going to wear you out faster. The wooden planes obviously have thicker, heavier irons. They're generally wider too, so they remove more wood faster with less effort. That's why back in the day, before we had machines to help us, people preferred wooden planes. So the only downside really is wooden planes take more practice to get to be comfortable adjusting them. You adjust them by tapping them with a hammer. The metal planes have a really handy little knurled adjustment knob that you can easily adjust them with. So easier to use, but in the long run, greater performance. I would recommend anybody start with something simple and cheap, like a small metal smoothing plane. When you get proficient with it, start looking for these wooden planes. You might really be surprised how wonderful they are. I prefer them hands down any day of the week. Now that you got your new plane at the yard sale and it's soaking in some oil or vinegar or whatever you need to get the rust off, let's look at the blade and what we need to do to get it tuned up. So now we've taken the rust off our blade. Look at our cap iron. I'm just going to touch real quick. You want your cap iron honed at about 50 degrees, maybe a little bit more. It increases the angle of attack so that you can plane against the grain or through knots or through any bad material. It really will revolutionize your hand planing and make it worth your while. On the blade, we want to grind the bevel down until we have a primary bevel and a secondary bevel. A good general angle to hone is 30 degrees. It's a good compromise between sharpness and durability. We just want our primary bevel ground out of our way so we don't need to touch all of that bevel every time we sharpen. So anything really less than our secondary bevel angle, but 25 degrees is good. If you don't have calipers or anything, just look at your blade. If the bevel width is at least double the thickness of the blade, it's 30 degrees. That's one way to know. So make sure that's at least wider than that. And the last thing we need to look at is the camber. Camber is just simply the curvature on the front of the blade that prevents the ears or the corners of the blade from digging into your work and leaving tracks is very, very important. You just have more camber. So like your jack plane, it may have, if I put a flat piece of wood on the blade and I look, I may have a corner of light that's 1/8 of an inch that I can see light on either corner. If it's the tri-plane, it might be a 32nd of an inch, and a smoothing plane might have as little as 64th of an inch. But you need some camber, always. So we've got a new blade that I've not restored, and we're going to grind it. We're going to put in our camber, and we're going to put in our primary bevel. We'll show you how fast and easy you can do this with a simple hand crank grinder with a very coarse A36 or less stone. First thing we're going to do is put it bevel down and go 90 degrees into the stone. And I'm going to take out any nicks, and I'm going to establish my camber by equally taking off my corners to some degree. So I've got the nicks out. I've got a decent camber of probably I've got about 32nd of an inch removed from each corner. The apex in the middle, which would be decent for a tri-plane. The next thing I'm going to do is work on my primary bevel. Don't worry about overheating your blade that much. Keep your thumb on it like this. When you feel it getting hot, just take it off and cool it. I like to cant the blade 45 degrees because you get a wider contact area and you remove more material. It also helps to keep moving the blade across the stone as you go so that you dissipate any heat equally. And we can check as we go by placing it down on the wood of the bench or some flat surface and lifting up until we notice that our ground bevel is a certain degrees. We want it to be something about 25 degrees, which is less than we hone at. So after we've ground everything down, we've got our big primary bevel. We cleaned up the back some just to get the major pitting and rust off, flatten it a little bit. But not perfectly flat. Don't spend hours lapping the back unless you really want to. Now we need to hone the blade to get it razor sharp. It must be extremely sharp to work well. Again, one stone. I've just got two to show you an option. This is a soft Arkansas stone. $20 I think you can get these. This is a Norton medium India stone. You only need one stone for everything, except a few profiled edge tools where you need little slip stones. But any kind of chisel, plane, anything like that, an edge tool, you need one stone, which is traditionally what most people here have, one oil stone. And it does not need to be dead perfectly flat. You may want to flatten it on something just to clean it up from time to time. Don't worry about it being flat. You don't need to come out here with stare-it rules every time you use the stone. These are $16. These are $20. It's all you need. And I also glue a slim piece of scrap leather as a strop. And that's it. And then we'll bring you in close and we'll show you exactly how I would hone. If you don't have a grinder, don't worry about it. Get you a flat piece of, this is discarded marble countertop or tile or anything that's basically flat, even a board. And just glue or get some sticky sandpaper and put it down. And you can just take your blade and come up to that 25-degree angle And you can do the same thing. You can just work it like this, and you can grind it in this way very cheaply if you don't have a grinder or if you don't wish to get one. So with an oil stone, we want, obviously, oil. It's important we use a non-drying oil, something like a mineral-based oil. Back in the day, it was whale oil. I like mineral oil. You can get this in any pharmacy, and I cut it 50-50 with a natural solvent, either citrus solvent or pine turpentine. So we put just a little bit of oil here. You don't want to use anything like canola oil or a plant-based drying oil because it will gum your stone up and be very frustrating. So we've got our blade freshly ground, nice big bevel all the way to the edge. We have a burr on this side, and we have our camber established. So the first thing I want to do, because I've got a burr here that I can feel, is place it flat down and go back and forth to remove that burr. And we'll see real quick how flat our plane actually is. This one is actually extremely flat, one of the few I've seen. So I've already got mostly a flat. There's a little bit where it's not touching on the sides. Most of the time, they're not very flat, or there's excessive rust and pitting. So what we do, instead of taking a long time to flatten all of this, like many people recommend, the traditional approach that I have found that works really well is to just slightly lift up. You probably couldn't even tell that I lifted up there. We're talking about a degree, maybe 1 degree of lift here, so that the stone is only contacting the very edge. You see that? So we have a bright, shiny edge of contact all the way across by lifting up just slightly. Okay? So that's really all the clean and polish we need to that back, because that's the only part that's ever going to touch wood. It's right there on the edge. So now that we've got that done, we want to go to our bevel. Okay? So go to our bevel. We want to come up to our 30-degree angle, about 30, and go back and forth. I'm not using a honing guide or anything like that. I'm just freehanding. I'm letting the natural back and forth motion of my arm give me a cambered edge. I'm going to do that in the center of the blade until I find a burr. Right there in the middle. Once I've got that, I want to carry that across. So I start applying pressure equally to either side. You can just take your finger and move it over to one side like that, and then the other side. That's one way to do that. You can just subconsciously lean from one side to the other as you hone, side to side. That's what I generally do. But in any case, you want to have a burr, feel a burr all the way across. Now, many magazines and experts will tell you now you go to a finer stone, and then a finer stone, and a finer stone until you've used 3 or 4 stones and spent a lot of money. I'm going to tell you the traditional approach that I have found that works really good is to use the same stone and just go back like we started, lift up a little. This is called chasing the burr. So now the burr has now been folded back over to the bevel, and we go back to the bevel again, but lightly this time. I'm just using the pressure of the blade, the weight of the blade, to lightly hone this side until I have a very fine burr now. Almost hard to tell, like just a hair was caught on the edge. Okay? That's called chasing the burr. So you fold the burr back and forth at least twice, and you're thinning it out so that it can be removed with the strop. And you don't need a finer stone when you do that. Most traditional toolboxes you find only had one stone that they used for everything. And that's how they did it. So then we come to our strop. This is just some leather glued to the lid of my box. It could have compound, but it doesn't have to. I place the blade down with the back flat on the stone, on the strop, and I pull. How many times do I pull? Well, I don't know, I pull 10 or so, and then I check like this carefully. If I don't feel a burr, I'm done. If I do, I continue. And I feel no burr, like this. Then I go to the bevel, I come back up to my 30 degrees, and I pull. Now because I have a camber, I'm going to pull, and then I'm going to kind of rock to one side and pull, and then rock to the other side and pull. As I pull, I'm rolling from side to side, rolling and stropping. 10, 15, 20, however many times you feel like. So I don't feel a burr now on either side, but it's extremely, extremely finely sharp now. So that's how quickly we can sharpen our blade. Grind it. I did all that in just a few minutes, really. And it's ready to go. Okay, now we're going to come to the cap iron, which is actually probably the most important part of this whole process if you want to be able to very efficiently plane any kind of wood. Get our cap iron, come to our stone. Our cap iron, just like our normal blade, has a back and a bevel. It just looks odd because it's got this curve in it. The first thing we want to do is take our back. We want to kind of come off the edge of the stone and just raise up until we can engage. And we want to go back and forth like this. We want a clean surface, clean flat surface all the way across that cap iron. Can y'all see that? So I've got a shiny flat line all the way across. So now we want to go into our bevel. We want to come up, instead of 30 degrees, we want to come up to about 50 or more degrees. So 90 is straight up like this. 45 would be halfway between that and flat, right? So 50 is a little higher. And I drop down to really polish all of that area. You can tell this one has never been worked on before, never been sharpened correctly. I want to bring that polish all the way across. There we go. Nearly all the way. Once we've got it polished all the way across, we have a burr on the back side. Then we come right back down. We do the same thing we did on the blade. We chase that burr. We can just pull because this is mild steel normally. And then we strop it. Stropping it is a little bit finicky. We got to come off the edge of the strop and kind of can it so we don't cut our leather. Now once it's stropped and shiny all the way across here and here, it's ready to mate to the blade, and we'll bring you in really close and show you how that's done. So we want to be very careful putting these together that we don't ding either edge. So put them together far apart, and then we want to start sliding that cap iron forward. Now if this was a smoothing plane, we might want it to go even closer than something like a triplane, and also I've found that every single plane is a little bit different. So you're going to have to learn your plane and play with it. I mean, what is that? Like a 64th of an inch? It's a tiny fraction. You will know when it's too close because your plane will either jam or the shavings will only accordion terribly. And if it's too far, like that, you'll know because, well, you'll get tear out. It won't be working correctly. The perfect setup will be free of tear out, but the shavings will eject straight up in your face fluidly. These are my 3 daily use wooden planes, just trying to give you some kind of a comparison. This tri-plane, smoothing plane, and this is my jack. You can see the jack, I think, has much more separation between the edge and the cap iron, and these two are very close. They just look like a tiny sliver of light to you. To me, they're, on close inspection, it may be 0.5 millimeter. Again, I've not measured these, and I wouldn't suggest you try to measure them except through, experimentation to know your planes. One thing you need to do is, with a new plane that you've never used, make sure you flatten the sole of it. If it's a wooden plane, you can just pop it in the vise. And if you have another plane, traditionally you would plane the sole with another plane, always going from the heel to the toe, from the back to the front, because most planes are actually laid out with the grain so that it works best in that direction. And you would just plane it like that. If you don't have a plane, you can do the same thing with get you a piece of tile or marble or something that's flat, float glass, put some sandpaper on it, and just rub the plane back and forth to flatten the sole up. So now that our blade is razor sharp and our cap iron has also been sharpened and set up, everything's ready to go. We just need to basically insert in the plane and get it set up to work. So if it's a metal plane, and I didn't really touch any of this adjustment, but we would assume this has all been cleaned and tightened down and oiled and ready to go. We very carefully take our plane blade with the bevel, primary bevel down, and we put it into the plane like that. Take our lever cap, center it, and I like a good tight snap like that. I want to advance by turning this to my right, if it's a Stanley. Some of the other ones are opposite. With a Stanley plane, and most of them you'll turn to the right to advance the iron forward. And I want to sight down the plane until I can see the iron sticking out. And then I want to adjust with this lateral adjustment lever to make sure the blade is centered. So I want to go a little bit to the side. Make sure it's centered. And it's easier to tell if we have a camera because obviously the apex of that curve of the camera should be in the center of the plane. And now that it's centered, I'm just going to go to my left, if it's a Stanley, and retract the iron. So that's how we set up a metal plane. I do think I should make a quick remark about this. You see a lot of people saying that you must lay your plane on the side. It's just not the case. If you look at old historical photographs, woodcuts, and old black and white videos, nobody does this with their planes. Their planes are always sitting correctly like this. This rule came about, as my understanding, from primary school where they were teaching shop class and inexperienced students might damage a plane unknowingly by throwing it on a nail or something. I find that this is actually more dangerous to the tool and you, because you can, as you work, hit the blade with your hand and cut yourself, or you could throw a tool down and hit the blade. If you gently place it down on the bench, on the wood, the blade's not going to cut you. If you hit the plane, no tool is going to hit the plane. It's actually safer. It's not going to dull. It's not going to destroy the plane. Hopefully I don't get too many comments about that. If it's a wooden plane, a little bit different. We place it down. I'm going to take my well set up cap iron and blade. I'm going to maintain pressure on the plane, holding it down as I place the blade in. I'm going to hold it there with one finger, still maintaining all the pressure, keeping everything down while I insert my wedge. Again, everything's tight down to the bench. I'm going to press the wedge in, pick it up, and give it a slight tap, the hammer. Hammer. We want a clean, rounded face to adjust our planes. We don't need to use a special mallet of wood or anything. These were designed to be adjusted by a hammer. Any old hammer will do. Again, I'm going to sight down, look down, and I'm going to do my lateral adjustment. But I don't have a special adjustment knob. I'm just going to use my hammer again. I see that, well, this corner is sticking out farther than this corner, so I'm going to just tap that side. Bring it back, sight down. It helps to have a light, something light behind you to actually see the blade as it protrudes. Okay, now I'm all the way across. I'm going to tighten it again. Might want to, if I want to retract the blade, I tap here, or if it's another kind of plane that I have a flat back, I can hit the back to retract the blade like that, and always tighten up the wedge afterwards. If I want to advance the blade, I just tap the back of the blade itself to send it in further and deeper, deepen the cut. So it's just learning how to adjust them, but these are well worth the effort. The last thing I want to do is run a little bit of wax on the sole of my plane. Find my wax, here it is. Last thing I want to do is run some wax like that on the plane. It helps reduce the friction. Paraffin wax works really good for this. Put them down like that, and they're ready to go. So just to give a quick demonstration of the cap iron in use, we're going to go with the grain and against the grain with both of these smoothing planes. So this is, you can see the grain rising, so this is with the grain. And I can go a little deeper. Some nice fat shavings. Feels like polished stone or glass. Now we're going to go against the grain. You can see I'm going right against it. Zero tear out. Still incredibly smooth. Nice full shavings. You can see how they wrinkle up like that and eject straight out. Instead of accordioning, they're coming straight up, and there's a slight pucker to let you know it's set up well. Let's see how this wooden plane does. Same thing, we're going to go with the grain. Obviously that's easy. Ooh. Another thing is the wooden planes generally make a smoother surface because the wood tends to burnish the wood as well. It was against the grain. See how that one shot right up out of there with a kind of a puckered look to it? That lets you know the cap iron is set well. Zero tear out, perfectly smooth, directly against the grain. Let's plane something more difficult now. This is some bird's eye maple. It's notoriously difficult wood to plane for a lot of people. They generally go to either super high angle planes, or they spray with water, or all these crazy things. If we just use our cap iron, we can plane it all day long. And I'm taking pretty heavy shavings, maybe 1/100 of an inch or more. I can advance this until I can't hardly push it. And I still don't get any tear out. No matter how thick of a shaving I get, you can even see the bird's eye ripples in the shaving there. Knots are another thing that give people grief often. But let's just see what this cap iron can do with this knot. If I had hit this knot with a single iron blade, see how heavy I can go against it. If you hit a knot with a single iron blade really hard, it'll be like hitting a brick wall. But you can see this knot, there's zero tear out anywhere around it, and I was taking quite thick shavings, as heavy as I could comfortably push. You can plane any wood with these $5 flea market planes all day long with the cap iron setup. Well, I hope that quick, dirty tutorial was helpful to people wanting to get into hand tools. I hope it cleared up a few misconceptions and broadened a few people's horizons. We'll have to do another tutorial later on actually all the tricks I found with dimensioning wood, because it's a much larger process that I can show into one video and have it be of a decent size. But hopefully that worked. Please, when you're out looking for these, find them, give them a good home, sharpen them up, and love them as much as I do. Thanks.